Britain has a new government this morning after voters threw out the ruling Conservatives in a historic shift to the left. Labour Party leader Keir Starmer required the symbolic approval of King Charles to become the new Prime Minister after Rishi Sunak handed in his resignation. Sunak's defeat is nothing less than a total repudiation by the British public.
Ricky Gervais, the renowned British comedian and social commentator, has never shied away from speaking his mind, particularly when it comes to politics. Known for his sharp wit and no-holds-barred critiques, Gervais has once again found himself at the center of controversy, this time targeting the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
You campaigned for it, you fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now.
Still, the sheer size of the Labour landslide gives Keir Starmer the most decisive of mandates. After 14 years in the political wilderness, Labour is back.
In a scathing takedown, Gervais has accused Starmer of bad leadership, holding him responsible for the recent anti-immigration riots that have shaken the nation. According to Gervais, the chaos and division seen on the streets are a direct consequence of Starmer's failure to address the immigration issue effectively. The comedian's blistering remarks have ignited a fierce debate, not only about the state of British politics, but also about the broader implications of leadership in times of crisis.
Well, this is what we expected. Now let's see what this new government could do. But it's very clear that when you look at how this vote sort of breaks down, there's not a lot of love for the political system here in Britain. There's a lot of anger as well. And that is something this new Prime Minister and this new government will have to deal with.
Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. Ricky Gervais, known globally for his acerbic wit and unapologetic style of comedy, has never shied away from controversy. Whether it's through his stand-up routines, his work on television, or his social media presence, Gervais has made a name for himself as a sharp-tongued commentator on society and politics. While Gervais is primarily known for his work in entertainment, he has increasingly become a vocal critic of political figures, using his platform to challenge what he sees as hypocrisy, incompetence, and injustice. His recent comments on Keir Starmer are a continuation of this trend.
A draining away of the hope, the spirit, the belief in a better future, that we need to move forward together. Now, this wound, this lack of trust, can only be healed by actions, not words. I know that.
With Gervais expressing his frustration at the state of British politics and what he perceives as the failures of its leaders. Keir Starmer took over the leadership of the Labour Party in April 2020, following the resignation of Jeremy Corbyn after a disastrous election result. Starmer, a former human rights lawyer and the director of public prosecutions, was seen by many as a steady hand who could steer the Labour Party back towards the center and make it a viable alternative to the ruling Conservative Party. His initial approach was cautious, focusing on rebuilding the party's image and distancing it from the more radical elements that had defined Corbyn's tenure.
The parties have been talking about immigration, but what does the public think? Well, an exclusive poll for Sky News has found that across the country, 43% of people asked thought that immigration has a negative impact on British society. That's compared to 35% here who say it has a positive impact. So clear difference.
However, as the months wore on, Starmer's leadership came under increasing scrutiny. His critics argue that he has failed to articulate a clear vision for the country, instead opting for a strategy of criticizing the government without offering a compelling alternative. This perceived lack of direction has led to frustration both within his party and among the electorate, many of whom feel that Starmer has not done enough to address the pressing issues facing the UK, particularly immigration. Immigration has been one of the most contentious issues in British politics for decades. The UK's decision to leave the European Union in 2016 was heavily influenced by concerns over immigration, with many voters feeling that the country's borders were too porous and that the influx of immigrants was placing undue pressure on public services.
The UK is struggling to deport over 1,000 illegal immigrants back to the countries they came from, according to government ministers. The Home Office said a backlog of over 1,000 people had formed in attempting to remove them from the UK back to countries where they had already claimed asylum. This summer has seen record numbers of illegal immigrants making their way to Britain in boats.
Successive governments have struggled to find a solution that balances the need for immigration with the concerns of the electorate, leading to a growing sense of frustration and division. Under Boris Johnson's leadership, the Conservative government made several attempts to tighten immigration controls, most notably with the introduction of a points-based immigration system. However, these measures have not been without their critics.
At first, they're simply shapes in the distance, but as we run down the beach, we see dozens of people. Men, women and children, all from Kurdistan, intent on reaching Britain. They're waiting for their ride, called a taxi boat, a smuggler's dinghy that's already picked up dozens of passengers.
Who argue that they have failed to address the root causes of the issue and have instead contributed to a hostile environment for immigrants. As the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer has been expected to present an alternative approach to immigration, one that addresses the concerns of those who feel left behind while also recognizing the benefits that immigration can bring to the country. However, his handling of the issue has been met with criticism from both the left and the right.
My mum and dad were scared of debt, so they would choose the bill that they wouldn't pay. They would have the phone cut off rather than pay the bill, because it was the easiest one to do without.
Ricky Gervais's criticism of Keir Starmer is rooted in a broader dissatisfaction with the political establishment's handling of immigration. Gervais, like many others, sees immigration as a complex issue that requires a nuanced approach, one that balances compassion with practicality. However, he believes that Starmer has failed to provide such an approach, instead offering vague platitudes and half-hearted policies that do little to address the underlying concerns of the electorate. In his scathing critique, Gervais accused Starmer of being out of touch with the realities faced by ordinary Britons. He argued that Starmer's failure to take a firm stance on immigration has created a vacuum of leadership, one that has allowed more extreme voices to dominate the debate.
40% of the Britons have said that they have a favourable view of Starmer, and this is down 4 points in just a fortnight. At least 49% people have an unfavourable view of him, and this is up by 5 points from the previous time.
Gervais went so far as to blame Starmer for the recent anti-immigration riots, suggesting that these violent outbursts were a direct consequence of the Labour leader's inability to offer a clear and effective solution to the issue. Gervais's comments have struck a chord with many who feel that Starmer has been too cautious in his approach to immigration. While the Labour leader has spoken about the need for a fair and compassionate immigration system, he has been criticized for failing to back up his words with concrete action. This perceived lack of leadership has allowed anti-immigrant sentiment to fester, culminating in the recent riots that have shocked the nation.
But we can make a start today with the simple acknowledgement that public service is a privilege and that your government should treat every single person in this country with respect.
The anti-immigration riots that have erupted in parts of the UK are a stark reminder of the deep divisions that exist within the country. These riots, characterized by violent clashes between protesters and the police, have been fueled by a growing sense of anger and frustration among certain segments of the population. While the immediate trigger for the riots may have been specific incidents, such as the arrival of asylum seekers in certain areas, the underlying causes are much more complex. Many of those who have taken to the streets in protest believe that their concerns about immigration have been ignored by the political establishment. They argue that the influx of immigrants has placed an unsustainable burden on public services.
Starmer spearheaded the push for a second Brexit referendum.
The only way truly to settle this is to ask people, do you want to leave on these terms, or would you rather remain?
And then, in 2020, he was elected leader on a promise to continue his predecessor's left-wing vision,
leading to increased competition for jobs, housing, and healthcare. Moreover, they feel that their cultural identity is being eroded by the presence of large numbers of immigrants who do not share their values or way of life. These sentiments have been exacerbated by a lack of clear and effective leadership on the issue. While the government has introduced measures to control immigration, many feel that these have been too little, too late. At the same time, the opposition under Keir Starmer's leadership has failed to offer a compelling alternative, leaving many voters feeling abandoned and disillusioned.
52% of people said they think Labour aren't telling the truth about what they really think about immigration. Not much better for the Conservatives, only 49% here, so not a big difference, saying the same thing about them. The Lib Dems doing slightly better, maybe they spelt it out better. But every region, every demographic distrusted the main two parties here on this point.
Ricky Gervais's argument that Keir Starmer is partly to blame for the anti-immigration riots is rooted in the belief that the Labour leader has failed to address the issue of immigration in a meaningful way. Gervais argues that by not taking a firm stance on the issue, Starmer has allowed tensions to escalate, ultimately leading to the violent outbursts that have occurred in recent weeks. Gervais's critique is not just about immigration, however. It is also about leadership.
A great deal of sympathy with those who are so desperate as to put their children in dinghies or even children's paddling pools and try to cross the channel. But I have to say that what they are doing is falling prey to criminal gangs, and they are breaking the law. They're also undermining the legitimate claims of others who would seek asylum in this country.
He believes that Starmer has failed to demonstrate the kind of strong and decisive leadership that is needed to tackle complex issues like immigration. Instead, Gervais argues, Starmer has been too concerned with appeasing different factions within his party and avoiding controversy, leading to a lack of clear direction and purpose. This perceived lack of leadership has had serious consequences, according to Gervais. In his view, the anti-immigration riots are not just a reaction to immigration itself.
If you come here illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. People need to know that coming here illegally on a boat will not lead them to a life in the United Kingdom.
The government's message of deterrence is echoing round the migrant camps of Dunkirk, literally.
But also a response to the failure of political leaders to address the issue in a way that satisfies the concerns of the electorate. By failing to take a firm stance on immigration, Gervais argues, Starmer has created a situation where extremist views can flourish, leading to violence and unrest. Ricky Gervais's criticism of Keir Starmer goes beyond the issue of immigration. It is also a broader critique of the state of British politics and the failure of the political establishment to address the concerns of ordinary people. Gervais is not alone in his frustration. Many Britons feel that their leaders are out of touch with the realities of life in the UK, and that they are more concerned with maintaining their own power than with solving the problems facing the country.
Politics can be a force for good. We will show that. We've changed the Labour Party, returned it to service, and that is how we will govern. Country first, party second.
This sense of disillusionment with the political establishment has been growing for years, fueled by a series of crises, from the financial crash of 2008 to the Brexit referendum in 2016. Each of these events has exposed the deep divisions within British society and the failure of its leaders to address them. The recent anti-immigration riots are just the latest manifestation of this growing discontent, and they serve as a stark reminder of the challenges facing the country. Gervais's critique of Starmer is also a call for a different kind of leadership.
Starmer has changed tack. He has ditched many of Corbyn's most radical policies. Left-wingers say they have been purged, including Corbyn himself, who was suspended for downplaying the extent of anti-Semitism and then kicked out.
One that is willing to confront difficult issues head-on and offer real solutions. Gervais believes that the current political establishment is too focused on avoiding controversy and maintaining the status quo, rather than addressing the root causes of the problems facing the country. In his view, what is needed is a new approach to leadership, one that is willing to take risks and make tough decisions in order to bring about real change. Unsurprisingly, Ricky Gervais's comments have sparked a strong reaction from both supporters and critics of Keir Starmer. Some have praised Gervais for speaking out and for highlighting the failures of the Labour leader, arguing that his critique is a necessary wake-up call for the party.
For the Labour Party, this is a very difficult bill.
A year after a crushing election loss for Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, Sir Keir set out to drag the Labour Party back to the centre when he became leader.
It is the honour and the privilege of my life be elected as leader.
They believe that Gervais's comments reflect the frustration felt by many Britons, particularly those who feel that their concerns about immigration have been ignored by the political establishment. Gervais's critique of Starmer is rooted in a broader disillusionment with the current state of British politics. For many, Starmer's tenure as Prime Minister has been marked by a series of missed opportunities and unfulfilled promises.
It's quick, and it's clearly a well-practiced drill. In the haste to secure a spot on the boat, tempers fray. But in the end, everyone gets on board, around 70 passengers. And as the dinghy starts to slowly chug away from the shore...
Elected as the leader of the Labour Party in 2020, Starmer initially presented himself as a figure of stability and pragmatism, someone who could steer the country through the turbulent waters of Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. However,
age groups, 54% of 18 to 24-year-olds thinks that immigration has a positive effect. But the older you get, the lower this number comes down. When you get to 65 and over, only 20% of these people thought immigration is good for society.
As Gervais and many others have pointed out, Starmer's leadership has often appeared cautious and indecisive, particularly on contentious issues like immigration. The immigration debate in the UK is one that has simmered for decades, but it has become increasingly polarized in recent years. For many, the issue is a complex and multifaceted one, involving questions of national identity, economic policy, and humanitarian responsibility. However, for others, it has become a lightning rod for broader frustrations with the political establishment and the perceived failures of successive governments.
Migration has been turned into a flagship issue by parties, especially on the right. And so just the fact that migration is on the political agenda, that the images of irregular arrivals are constantly broadcast by televisions across Europe, is putting the agenda pushed by these parties much more at the forefront of the political.
Gervais's argument is that Starmer, by failing to take a clear and decisive stance on immigration, has allowed these frustrations to fester, ultimately leading to the kind of violent unrest seen in the recent riots. The anti-immigration riots that Gervais references are a stark reminder of the deep divisions that exist within British society. These riots, which have erupted in several cities across the UK, have seen groups of protesters clashing with police and targeting immigrant communities.
A great deal of sympathy with those who are so desperate as to put their children in dinghies or even children's paddling pools and try to cross the channel. But I have to say that what they are doing is falling prey to criminal gangs, and they are breaking the law. They're also undermining the legitimate claims of others who would seek asylum in this country.
The violence has been widely condemned, but it has also sparked a broader conversation about the root causes of such unrest. For Gervais, the blame lies squarely at the feet of Starmer, who he accuses of failing to address the underlying issues that have fueled the anger and resentment behind the riots. One of the key criticisms that Gervais levels at Starmer is his perceived lack of leadership on immigration. Throughout his time in office, Starmer has struggled to articulate a clear and coherent policy on the issue. While he has spoken about the need for a humane and fair immigration system, critics argue that his actions have often fallen short of his rhetoric.
The extra effort that will have required should not be underestimated by anyone. And we pay tribute to that today. And we also recognise the dedication and hard work he brought to his leadership.
Gervais, in particular, has been vocal about what he sees as Starmer's failure to take a firm stance on illegal immigration, arguing that this has only served to embolden those who seek to exploit the system. According to Gervais, the consequences of Starmer's inaction on immigration have been far-reaching. He argues that the Prime Minister's failure to address the issue has not only contributed to the rise in anti-immigration sentiment, but has also undermined public trust in the government's ability to manage the situation effectively. This, Gervais suggests, has created a fertile ground for the kind of xenophobic and racist rhetoric that has fueled the recent riots.
In 2014, Keir Starmer was knighted for services to criminal justice. A year later, he was elected as Labour MP for a London constituency and rose quickly within the party. He served as an opposition spokesman on immigration and also Brexit.
For the Labour Party, this is a very difficult bill.
For Gervais, the connection between Starmer's leadership and the unrest on the streets is clear. By failing to provide a clear and decisive response to the challenges posed by immigration, Starmer has allowed the situation to spiral out of control. Gervais's criticism of Starmer is not just about the immigration issue, however. It also speaks to a broader frustration with the way that Starmer has handled his role as Prime Minister. For many, Starmer's leadership has been characterized by a cautious and overly technocratic approach, one that often seems more concerned with managing public opinion than with taking bold and decisive action. Gervais, who has long been an advocate for speaking truth to power.
Officials have introduced new border controls with Slovakia, where there's been a spike in migrants passing through, and where an election is also set to take place. The right-wing candidate leading the polls wants to suspend EU rules on open movement.
Argues that this kind of leadership is ill-suited to the challenges facing the UK today. In his view, what the country needs is a leader who is willing to take risks and make difficult decisions, rather than one who is constantly trying to play it safe. This critique of Starmer's leadership style is one that resonates with a growing number of people in the UK. While Starmer has managed to maintain a relatively high level of support among certain sections of the electorate, there is also a sense that his cautious approach is out of step with the urgent and pressing nature of the issues facing the country. From the ongoing fallout of Brexit to the economic challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic.
I don't want the words the Labour Party and anti-Semitism in the same sentence again as we go forward.
His cabinet in waiting is now mostly drawn from Labour's right. So what does this socialist turned centrist really stand for?
Many feel that the UK is at a critical juncture and that what is needed is bold and visionary leadership, rather than the kind of cautious pragmatism that has come to define Starmer's tenure. Gervais's takedown of Starmer has also touched on a broader debate about the role of leadership in times of crisis. For many, the recent anti-immigration riots are a symptom of a deeper malaise within British society, one that has been exacerbated by a lack of clear and decisive leadership at the top. Gervais argues that Starmer's failure to address the immigration issue effectively is indicative of a broader problem with his leadership style.
And speaking of the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer's honeymoon in office seems to have ended. Since his dramatic election in July, Starmer's favourability ratings have dipped as much as 9 points, and this is according to a YouGov poll. The Labour leader garnered high ratings during and immediately after the 2024 elections. An earlier YouGov poll from July recorded an 8% increase in number of Britons who prefer Starmer.
One that prioritizes short-term political calculations over long-term solutions. The comedian's comments have sparked a fierce debate, with some defending Starmer's cautious approach as a necessary response to the complex and sensitive nature of the immigration issue. They argue that a more aggressive stance on immigration could have unintended consequences, including further inflaming tensions and alienating key sections of the electorate. However, Gervais and his supporters counter that the time for caution has passed, and that what is needed now is a leader who is willing to take bold and decisive action to address the root causes.
There's been mood for change in Britain. Now, after 14 years in the political wilderness, Labour is back, with Sir Keir Starmer about to move into 10 Downing Street.
We have one job, which is to make this a summer of change.
Of the current unrest. Gervais's critique of Starmer also raises important questions about the role of comedy in political discourse. As a comedian, Gervais has built his career on challenging authority and speaking truth to power, often using humor as a way to address serious and contentious issues. In this case, however, his comments about Starmer have sparked a debate about the limits of comedy and the responsibilities that come with using humor to critique political leaders. Some have argued that Gervais's remarks are an example of the kind of irresponsible rhetoric that can contribute to further.
Across Europe, migration is resurging as a key political battleground. It's propelling support for far-right parties. and is fomenting spats between EU member states, aggravating divides between the countries migrants travel through and those they want to reach.
Division and polarization, particularly in a climate where tensions are already running high. Others, however, see Gervais's critique as a necessary and timely intervention, one that highlights the failures of the current political leadership and calls for a more robust and effective response to the challenges facing the country. The debate over Gervais's comments is also a reflection of the broader polarization within British society. The immigration issue has become a flashpoint for wider debates about national identity, economic policy, and social cohesion, with different sections of the population holding deeply entrenched.
If you voted Labour yesterday, we will carry the responsibility of your trust as we rebuild our country. But whether you voted Labour or not, in fact, especially if you did not, I say to you directly, my government will serve you.
Views on the matter. For some, Gervais's critique of Starmer is a welcome and necessary challenge to the political establishment, one that shines a light on the failures of the current government and calls for a more decisive response to the issues facing the country. For others, however, his comments are an example of the kind of divisive rhetoric that has contributed to the current climate of unrest and division. In the midst of this debate, it is important to consider the broader implications of Gervais's critique for the future of British politics. As the country grapples,
the UK is struggling to deport over 1,000 illegal immigrants back to the countries they came from, according to government ministers. The Home Office said a backlog of over 1,000 people had formed in attempting to remove them from the UK back to countries where they had already claimed asylum. This summer has seen record numbers of illegal immigrants making their way to Britain in boats.
With the challenges of immigration, economic inequality, and social division, the need for strong and effective leadership has never been greater. Gervais's comments serve as a reminder of the importance of holding political leaders accountable for their actions, particularly when those actions have far-reaching consequences for the country as a whole. At the same time, it is also important to
That is the taxi boat that's just arrived to pick these people up. That boat is already really full, but as you can see, they're marching out through the water. Now, the reason they're doing that is they know the police can't stop them once they're in the water. But actually, there's not a police officer to be seen.
The water is cold. Getting into the boat isn't easy.
Recognize the limitations of Gervais's critique. While his comments about Starmer's leadership have resonated with many, they also risk oversimplifying the complex and multifaceted nature of the immigration issue. The challenges facing the UK today are not ones that can be solved by a single leader or a single policy. They require a comprehensive and nuanced.
Politics can be a force for good. We will show that. We've changed the Labour Party, returned it to service, and that is how we will govern. Country first, party second.
Balanced approach that takes into account the diverse needs and perspectives of the population. While Gervais's call for more decisive leadership is an important one, it is also important to recognize that there are no easy solutions to the issues facing the country and that the path forward will require difficult and often uncomfortable choices. Keir Starmer for problems that are far more complex than Gervais acknowledges. They argue that immigration is a multifaceted issue, influenced by global economic factors, international conflicts, and long-standing policies that cannot be easily addressed by one leader or one party.
Migration has been turned into a flagship issue by parties, especially on the right. And so just the fact that migration is on the political agenda, that the images of irregular arrivals are constantly broadcast by televisions across Europe is putting the agenda pushed by these parties much more at the forefront of the political.
Moreover, they contend that Gervais's approach, which emphasizes strong, decisive action, risks inflaming tensions further and could lead to more division rather than resolution. Despite the backlash, Gervais's critique has undeniably resonated with a significant portion of the public. It underscores the deep dissatisfaction with the current political leadership and the growing demand for a leader who can rise to the occasion and tackle the pressing issues of the day with clarity and conviction. Whether Starmer will respond to this challenge remains to be seen, but the criticism from figures like Gervais suggests that the pressure on him to deliver meaningful change is mounting. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What impact do you think this will have on the immigration debate? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.